Hello, my name is Karen Webb. I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist, clinical hypnotherapist, NLP practitioner and counsellor, and I'm in practice in Dorset. And in this particular video, I thought what I'd do is talk a little bit about mood disorders, and particularly with regard to post-traumatic stress disorder, fear of abandonment, and borderline personality disorder. There is a growing understanding in recent years, and probably in about the last 20 years, as to how these what are called mood disorders can affect people, and there seems to be an overlap in some areas between the two, and I think what's probably a good idea at this stage to do is to talk about, if you like, some of the symptomology and what science now thinks is the cause or the likely cause, or at least contributory factors to these mood disorders. Now, it seems to be that somebody with post-traumatic stress disorder, fear of abandonment, and or borderline personality disorder will have at early stages in their life, in most situations, will have experienced some kind of trauma that may have resulted in them being abandoned or left for long periods of time, and other issues perhaps with family members and things of that nature that have an effect on the developing personality of the individual going through these things. However, that in and of itself is not necessarily everything that then results in either post-traumatic stress disorder, fear of abandonment, or borderline personality disorder developing later in life. It seems to be that if you like, there's a mixture of what they call nature and nurture. So these events can create what the dynamics of what we could call a perfect storm, in the sense that if there's another contributory factor involved, that will likely result in later in life this person developing certain symptoms that reflect one or other, or maybe an overlap both of these mood disorders. And the other factor is, it seems that modern neuroscience is showing that people with a prevalence to experience extreme fear of abandonment have a part, if you like, there's parts of the brain that don't communicate with each other in the way that happens in other people's brains. So in this instance, for instance, somebody that has a strong fear of abandonment, it's been shown that the amygdala, which is the part that governs our emotions, some people call it the reptilian brain, it's the part of us that focuses on basic needs, security, survival, food, procreation, things like that. And then we have other parts of the brain which function at a higher level or deal with higher level issues. And it's been found that people with extreme fear of abandonment, the part of the brain, the amygdala, doesn't communicate very well in some situations with the front of the brain. And the front of the brain is the part of us, the part of our brains that manages our emotional responses to certain situations. So with people with either fear of abandonment and or borderline personality disorder, it's shown that when a certain trigger happens, or certain triggers that are idiosyncratic perhaps to each individual, when they occur, the emotional intensity that's fired off by the amygdala happens to such a degree that it can cause them to react in very, very emotional ways, because the front of the brain, that in other people that don't have their brains wired, if you like, for want of a better expression in this way, is not able to exhibit a braking response, is not able to, if you like, dampen, reduce the emotional intensity in these moments. So what happens with somebody with a strong fear of abandonment, whether a post-traumatic fear of abandonment or whether it's borderline personality disorder, something can happen that may seem innocuous to an individual that doesn't have this particular mood disorder, but to the person with the mood disorder, it's very, very real. You know, there's a saying in cognitive behavioural therapy that you learn, that feelings are not facts, and we learned that to help clients understand that whilst they might feel a certain way, those feelings don't necessarily represent a factual take on the world. However, when you look at the field of research in fear of abandonment, we understand that for that person, feelings are facts. Their feelings are, in certain situations, so intense, and of course we can only navigate life in a subjective way. So our experience of life is very real to us, and in those circumstances the feelings that that person has are as good as facts to them. So if they feel they've been criticised in a way that might mean that there's a rejection or an abandonment or a deep judgment being made against them that negates them as a person, whether that's real or not, if they perceive it to be such, that's how they will react. And this reaction can manifest in a number of ways: extreme anger or rage. It can result in sadness. Some people will self-harm. Other people sometimes, if they feel that they're going to be rejected or abandoned, they will reject and abandon the person that they think is going to abandon them. And they will do it based on their perception of what took place. However, unfortunately, in these highly charged emotional situations, research has shown, both for people with post-traumatic stress disorder fear of abandonment and people with borderline personality disorder, that they will have distorted thinking and recollections of what took place in those very intense emotional situations, and their perception will often be of maybe, this often happens with family members, that these particular situations, it tends to occur with people very, very close to them with whom they have a strong emotional bonding. And in these situations, amongst these close people, when they feel there is a strong rejection or abandonment potentially coming up, their mind, because of this, if you like, disconnection in these high intensity situations between the amygdala and the front of the brain, it will distort what's actually happening, and they will maybe sense that they're being, or feel they're being victimised, or that somebody is intentionally slighting them, when actually they're not, or if they are, not to the degree that they assumed. In fact, it's been shown, research has shown that people with borderline personality disorder, for instance, are very, very good at reading people. They will often pick up a person's emotions before other people will. However, there are two areas that they misread, and these areas are crucial very often to navigating relationships successfully. And it's been shown that people with this mood disorder will misread a neutral face. So if somebody's face is neutral, very often they will see in that face, erroneously, anger or criticism. And as a result, they will therefore respond to a message that they think is coming across non-verbally, and that can potentially trigger a reaction in them. And the reactions can be very, very quick. One of the characteristics of fear of abandonment and borderline personality disorder is that a person's emotions, when they're in these moments, can fluctuate very, very widely. They can go up to extreme anger and rage, and then come down to sadness and hopelessness and emptiness, and up and down again. And all of this can have a distorting effect on the person's perception of the events that took place. To an outside observer, it can seem quite, how can I put it, shocking in some ways, because we're not privy to the perceptions and the sensations that they're experiencing. It's been said by an expert on this subject that somebody with borderline personality disorder, it's as if they have an emotional sensitivity that's the equivalent of a physical sensitivity to pain of somebody with third-degree burns. They live in a world where their emotions, the way they navigate life, their emotions that they experience, the highs and the lows, are much more extreme. So if you can imagine somebody without abandonment fears, maybe their ups and downs can be like this. Somebody with abandonment fears, the highs and lows are much greater, and the mood can change in an instant. They can be very happy, and then something, maybe they're not even consciously aware of it, can happen, and it will trigger a sadness, or something else can happen and it will trigger anger that seems to come out of nowhere. The difference that Susan Anderson makes, and she's an expert in post-traumatic stress disorder and fear of abandonment and borderline personality disorder, she says there are fine distinctions, in her opinion, to differentiate the two issues. And one of the ones that she feels is of most interest is the fact that when one of these flare-ups happen, when somebody with a fear of abandonment or borderline personality disorder encounters a flare-up, and maybe that results in a disagreement or an argument, an outright argument with somebody else, the person with post-traumatic stress disorder fear of abandonment, once time has gone by and the intensity of the emotion has dropped, will at some point be able to look back on the situation and realise that they had a responsibility. They were partially responsible, at least, for what took place. Whereas somebody with borderline personality disorder, they have a much harder time doing that. In fact, oftentimes they can't do that because it seems that their emotional vulnerability is such that to admit at some level to themselves and perhaps to another that they had responsibility for the argument that happened, because their self-esteem is very fragile due to abandonment in the past and then their very sensitive nature, they find it hard to admit that they had a part to play. So the difference is, it seems that somebody with fear of abandonment, in and of itself largely, they will move through that period of distorted thinking and come to a point where they realise, it wasn't all the other person's fault. There's kind of a 50-50 or a 60-40 or an 80-20 thing going on here, and I had a part to play too. Whereas somebody with borderline personality disorder, they don't very easily get to that point. One of the things about challenges like this, for instance, I have OCD. One of the things about OCD is that most people with OCD understand they have a problem. They might not know the terminology for it, but they'll understand that they have a problem. Whereas somebody with another challenge, like borderline personality disorder, one of the recognised elements of this disorder is that the person finds it very difficult to admit that they have this challenge, because in doing so, because they already feel emotionally vulnerable and psychologically vulnerable due to rejection, due to trauma in their life, and due to the way the brain is wired that makes them very, very sensitive individuals, they find it difficult to admit that they may have fault in some of these situations, because to do so would be to diminish themselves yet more, and they already have a very low opinion of themselves. Very often they can feel very hateful towards themselves or feel that they're very bad people. So to admit to themselves that maybe they had a part to play in a difficult situation would further undermine their oftentimes fragile self-esteem. It's not to say that they can't have positive experiences and navigate life very much as many other people do. In fact, a lot of the time, some of these people they can navigate life, and you would not know that they had challenges like these. It takes a triggering event very often to reach inside, if you like, and raise the emotional stakes, the emotional intensity. And a lot of people talk about, that make videos on this or write about this, is they talk about the core wound of abandonment that happened in childhood. And very often when somebody with fear of abandonment or post-traumatic fear of abandonment or borderline personality disorder react in this very emotional way, in one way of looking at it, they're not only reacting to the issue to hand. If you like, the little child inside that's never fully recovered at this stage, if it's been untreated, that's never fully recovered, is reacting to the original abandonment. So the reaction that you, for instance, maybe experience is not really entirely aimed at the situation with you, but it's coming from a childhood trauma that's driving it. And I think this understanding is vital, because it shows us that when a person with fear of abandonment or borderline personality disorder responds in a very emotional way, we ought not to take it personally. You can find that people with fear of abandonment and borderline personality disorder, on the whole, are some of the kindest, generous, empathic, thoughtful people you are ever likely to meet. And they, more than you, if you find yourself in a conflict, for instance, with somebody with fear of abandonment and borderline personality disorder, they, more than you, are suffering because they don't want to feel like that. They don't want to feel bad. And if you think you feel bad caught up in that dynamic, they feel, maybe 10 or 100 times worse. So one of the best things we can do certainly as counsellors, and I guess this goes in any situation, is to have empathy. But if you're in a relationship with somebody with post-traumatic stress disorder, fear of abandonment, or borderline personality disorder, one of the things that you can aim to do from the outset in order to understand them is to realise that they are in pain when this happens, and that can help you to act with empathy towards them. They're not trying to be problematic, they're not trying to be difficult, they don't want to argue. It's triggered something inside, and it's very difficult for them. I understand, as I say, I have OCD, and I know that certain things that my OCD does, it causes me to respond in a certain way that I don't want to respond, and it does cause me emotional pain. But now I've reached a point that I realise that actually that's not me that's doing that. It's due to the way my brain is wired, and it triggers a reaction sometimes that is out of my power to fully control. And if I had the choice, I wouldn't do it. And it's the same with somebody with fear of abandonment and borderline personality disorder. Really, if they could respond differently, they would. And the thing to do is to approach the situation with empathy and aim not to get caught up in a blame game. It's very easy if an argument starts, the natural reaction for some people is, you said this, no, you said that, and you get involved in that, and all that does is pour petrol on the situation. So one of the best things you can do if you're with somebody with post-traumatic stress disorder, fear of abandonment, or borderline personality disorder, and they reach one of these highly intense emotional states, whether it's an angry one or a sad one, aim to approach the situation with empathy. Aim not to get caught up in the blame game, and seek to communicate with them in such a way that you validate their experience. It's very, very real for them, just as our experience is real for us. And if you can understand, sometimes it's a little, here's an analogy for you, it's a little bit like two people that their native tongue is different, and they have a certain basic understanding of a common tongue. And in those moments, if we understand that what their experience is different from ours because we speak a different language, and then do our level best to speak with that common tongue that we have, in order to communicate effectively and not get caught up in a blame game or undermining the person inadvertently, perhaps by saying pull yourself together, as might be the reaction of somebody with ignorance of this, and understand that they are suffering. And if you can respond to them from a position of love and empathy, give them time, give the emotions time to cool down, and then hopefully, if good luck is on your side, they'll come to a point where they'll look back and realise that it wasn't all your fault. Oftentimes, one of the things that you'll hear somebody with fear of abandonment or borderline personality disorder do is they'll say it's your fault. You read books on this. Look on the internet, you'll find that one of the things is they'll attribute complete blame to somebody else, but there can come a time when they realise, maybe we were both responsible. And when that happens, that's when you can begin to pick things up from where you left off and begin to recover, to talk frankly with each other, and again to be able to express love with each other. So there are a number of factors that you'll notice with somebody with fear of abandonment and borderline personality disorder, and I'll just talk about a few now that relate to borderline personality disorder. We've talked about, if you like, perhaps the prime one, which is this incredible fear of abandonment and emotional sensitivity. With the emotional sensitivity come the highs and the lows that can happen, in an instant, over events that maybe to you or I might seem innocuous, but to the person dealing with this challenge, it's very, very real, and you need to remember that. They're not being difficult, it's very real to them. They may engage in self-harm, sometimes they may, to one degree or another, maybe hit out or lash out at a loved one close to them. They might, on occasion, in high-intensity situations, drive erratically. What else? Those are some of the main ones that come to mind that you'll notice. And of course, the fluctuation of mood. they might feel empty very often. They have a difficult sense of knowing who they are, and it seems that they develop their sense of awareness depending upon the people who are around them at the time. And they've been said to be chameleon-like. With one person or one group of people, they might respond in a certain way, yet with another friend or another group of people, they might respond markedly differently. Now, I know we all do this to one degree or another, but it seems that the scope of change for somebody with this challenge can be wider, because they don't really have a good sense so they don't have a good sense of identity with regard to their their sense of selfhood, if you like. It can be quite loose and can move depending upon the people or the group that they are around at any one time. It seems they also have difficulty trusting, because in the back of their mind they always expect in the end to be abandoned and to be judged. That therefore makes them find it very difficult to trust people, to the extent that if in a highly charged emotional situation these triggers fire off in those situations, they might abandon somebody else. They might end a relationship or leave a relationship because it triggers so much intensity, and there may be other factors involved too. It triggers so much intensity, and because they find being abandoned so difficult to experience, they will abandon somebody else first rather than be abandoned. Doesn't mean when they do that they don't experience a lot of emotional pain themselves. No doubt they do, but the sense to them of being abandoned is the thing that they fear most, and rather than be abandoned, in some highly charged situations, they will end the relationship, they will leave the relationship. The good news is, there was a time that people used to think that people with borderline personality particularly, and I guess possibly, although my knowledge in this regard is not so clear with regard to post-traumatic stress disorder, fear of abandonment, but people used to think that there wasn't really much hope, people couldn't change. But they've actually found now that the field of psychotherapy has developed more, and the understanding of what triggers these conditions, and that the people are not being problematic, they're actually in a lot of emotional pain, and they would give anything not to experience these challenges. And they found that those people that enter therapy, that have counselling, and that are completely open and honest, and they're prepared to put on the table all of the relevant issues, how they behave, what the triggers are, learning all about these things, that a lot of improvement can be made. And there's a form of counselling called dialectical behaviour therapy that is particularly effective. Other methods that are applied are mindfulness-based therapies and cognitive behavioural therapy. So there is a lot of hope. People can improve. If you look on the internet, and I guess many of you will have done by the very fact that you're watching this, there are other people out there that have made videos, many of them who have themselves been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, or they've recognised that they have fear of abandonment, and they have very courageously, I think, come out in the open, and they've shared with other people what their challenges were and how they've learned to overcome them or mitigate them and moderate them. And I think they're shining examples of people that have responded successfully to the situation, and in so doing they're helping other people as well. So there is a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. Things can be done, and improvement can be found for those that are prepared to go for therapy and really dig down into it and understand that if you really treat this accurately, if you're really honest with yourself, that's what it's about. It's about self-honesty with yourself, and if you go to therapy with your counsellor too, and perhaps doctor, if you're really honest with them and really honest with yourself, really big changes can be made. But the big step is recognising the problem, admitting the problem to self, and then once you've done that, that's the beginning of real change. Kind of skirting around the edges and avoiding the real issue will mean that a person might kind of go through the motions of therapy, but if they don't really address the real issue and the challenges and avoid those, as people are often want to do, one of the big challenges that people have with borderline personality disorder, and I guess, as I say, maybe not so much, but with fear of abandonment, is they talk about people are worried about the stigma. What will people think if people find out? What does this say about me? And because they already have a fragile sense of self, because of the abandonment or the trauma in the past, to accept on a personal level that they might have a mood disorder, it can be in some ways almost the last straw. It can be perceived to be the thing that is finally unacceptable. And it's only those that actually face up to reality and put all their cards on the table and deal with this are the ones that move forward. But they can move forward, and the shining examples on the internet of people that have been very courageous, and they're talking about the challenges they've had and how they've moved forward, and in the process they're helping lots of other people with the same challenges, and I think that's a great credit to them. So progress can be made. And the other thing that's I've learned recently when I've been studying this in some more depth is that around about the age of 45, 50, very often the highs and lows can begin to reduce. It seems, and you find this in other areas too, sometimes, that as a person ages, the extremes of the behaviour begin to diminish too. So maybe there's a hormonal element or something like that that also affects some mood disorders. Well, I'm sure there is, but in this regard, particularly, it seems that as a person ages, in many instances, my understanding is that it does begin to flatten out a bit, or maybe not flatten out, but not be so high and low, which is, again, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Now, I'm based in Bournemouth, I'm based in Dorset, and it's accessible to people from Hampshire, Wiltshire, Somerset too. And if you're looking for help with either fear of abandonment, post-traumatic stress disorder, fear of abandonment, or borderline personality disorder, I'm willing to consider working with you. Now, you need to understand, unlike phobias, I've done a video on phobias and things of this nature, which can often be cleared in one session. This is something that's going to take real commitment on your part, and in many instances the therapy is a long-term duration as you learn new skills to recognise your own triggers, to respond differently, to create space, to not attribute to other people negative intentions that may not be real, or if they are, maybe not to the degree that you perceive them to be. It's about facing up to the fact that this is a chronic condition, but it is something that can be improved upon. So if you're prepared and really committed to making positive change, then give me a phone call or send me an email, and I'd be happy to discuss working with you. You can go to our website, which is www.soulsynthesis.co.uk. That's soulsynthesis.co.uk. You'll see a lot about me, my background, my work, how many years I've been working in this field of psychotherapy, counselling, hypnotherapy, NLP, and cognitive behavioural therapy. You'll learn about the courses that I run, but also I'll give you the opportunity to get in touch if you want to. Send me an email, talk about this in more depth, or use the phone number that's on the website to have a word, and we can see what next steps we can take. So if you're looking for support in this area, and if you're committed, I'm confident that together we can make positive progress. So I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you very much for listening to this video. Bye-bye for now. Hold up, don't go away. One of the things about doing videos like this ad lib is that sometimes you don't always remember everything that you want to include, or you remember things afterwards that you wish you had included. And I just want to add to the video, because it's very relevant, that sometimes people, particularly with borderline personality disorder, engage in a process called splitting. And that is that they idealise somebody that's very, very close to them for a period of time. It might be months, weeks, months or years, but then when they have a disagreement or something happens and that person appears to them to not be as perfect as they thought they were, rather than do what perhaps you or I would do and realise that, okay, on the whole they're an okay person, but they might have this trait or that trait that it isn't so good, or I didn't know about, or something like that. and understand shades of grey, they tend not to do that. Somebody's either idealised or devalued. And this tends to be a pattern of behaviour that takes place in their life. They will idealise somebody, something will happen, and rather than dealing with the issue in isolation and realising that just represents part of an issue, what will happen is they will perceive that person almost entirely as bad. They find it difficult to understand that a person can have, largely positive traits and maybe some weaknesses, or maybe some traits that are not so good. So what happens is they switch from idealisation and holding somebody up on a pedestal to where they really devalue them, and for a time they can even hate them. So that's also something that needs to be borne in mind. If you feel that you have borderline personality disorder, it's worth watching out for, because again, you'll be distorting reality to a certain degree. Very few people in the world are either wholly good or wholly bad. Unless you're a raging psychopath who, as I mentioned, they tend to not have empathy for people. I think I mentioned it on this video. I've been doing several at the same time, so bear with me if I haven't. So unless you're a raging psychopath, it's most people are mixtures of character traits and personality and behaviour, and they exist somewhere on a moral continuum that's not static. It moves from side to side. But somebody with borderline personality disorder struggles to understand this, and they either idealise somebody, or when things go wrong, as they always do, they might perceive that person's about to abandon them or criticise them or done something that doesn't match with their idealised perception of what this person ought really to do in their opinion. And when that happens, the person is devalued. And the person with the mood disorder honestly really finds it very difficult to view them in any other way. Again, it's not a mind game. It's not something they're doing to be spiteful. It's because of the way the disorder influences them, and they may or may not change their opinion. It depends what happens. So that's something, again, to bear in mind when you're thinking about this. If you're somebody with this disorder, if you're aware that you have, bear in mind that the way you perceive people might be being influenced by the disorder rather than reality itself. If you're a therapist or a counsellor or somebody that lives with somebody with this disorder, again, take this into account, that the situation is such that it's a distortion of reality that can hopefully be overcome when the person gets out of the high intensity emotional state. But I thought it's really important that I add this to the end of the video. So thanks for giving me the additional time, and I'll talk to you again, I'm sure, in the not too distant future. Bye bye for now.